Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Bytes of Good Live. Bytes of Good Live is a monthly speaker series hosted by Hack4Impact, with the goal of engaging both Hack4Impact members and the greater community in critical discussions about technology, the role it plays in our society, and career paths in the social good space. For our event today, we have the absolute privilege of talking to Skyler Wharton. They are a machine learning and backend software engineer on Airbnb's anti-discrimination product team, but they were formerly a founding member of the Penn chapter of Hack4Impact and helped create Hack4Impact Nationals. We are so grateful to hear from a previous member's experience continuing to tackle issues related to tech and social good in their full-time career. Today, Skyler will be covering the harm that machine learning systems cause participants and what developers can do to build better ones. We will start with a presentation, but we will have tons of time for questions at the end, so please feel free to send your questions in the chat throughout the entire event. Thank you again, Skyler, for being here with us, and with that, let's get started.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. So as Elena mentioned, today I'll be talking with y'all about how machine learning systems are increasingly being used as tools of oppression. And let's go. I'm super excited to be here with y'all today. Cool. So just a brief overview of what I'll be talking about today. First, I'll give an introduction of myself, a bit about where I'm coming from and my perspective in this discussion. Then I'll walk through some examples of harm caused by both machine learning systems and also label collection processes for machine learning systems. Then I'll talk about why this harm is occurring. And finally, I'll wrap up with a call to action, and we'll spend some time on Q&A. So hi, everyone again. My name is Skyler Wharton, and my pronouns are they, them. And as Elena mentioned, I am currently a software engineer doing both machine learning and backend engineering at Airbnb, specifically on Airbnb's anti-discrimination product team, which means that I get to spend my time developing interventions that are deployed on Airbnb's platform that then hopefully reduce discrimination, which is absolutely a dream job for me. And I think one thing to talk about as we go into this conversation are some of my own privileges. When talking about discrimination, it's really important to center the experiences of people who are actually being harmed. I have many privileges. For example, I am white, I'm an American citizen, I'm currently able-bodied, I'm thin, and English is my first language. My privileges, and in particular my whiteness, mean that I do not experience many types of discrimination, which means that my experiences are not sufficient for uncovering patterns of discrimination that machine learning systems cause and exacerbate. Instead, we as engineers, or data scientists, or researchers, or just active and involved citizens need to center the experiences of Black, Indigenous, and people of color people, especially BIPOC women and femme people, in order to understand the true extent of harm caused by machine learning systems. So first, let's talk about two examples of real-world machine learning systems that have caused harm. Our first example involves a facial recognition system that the Detroit Police Department uses to identify and arrest suspects. So in January 2020, earlier this year, Robert Williams was arrested for shoplifting by a facial recognition system. And Robert Williams is this person on the right. The catch here, however, was that the facial recognition system was wrong. Had a member of the police department simply compared Mr. Williams' face to that of the person who committed the crime, they could have easily seen that they weren't the same person. Nevertheless, Williams was arrested, interrogated, kept in custody for more than 24 hours, released on personal bail, and had to go to court. As a result of the Detroit Police Department's use of the facial recognition system, Mr. Williams experienced several kinds of harm. For example, he was humiliated and embarrassed as a result of this event. Both him and his family experienced trauma. For example, as a large Black man, Mr. Williams could have been killed had he resisted arrest, which would have been very reasonable given that the arrest was unjust. Fortunately, he was not killed or physically harmed when he was arrested, but the event nevertheless was very traumatic for him. This event also caused lasting harm to his daughters. And in fact, he and his wife now wonder whether they need to put their 2 young daughters into therapy. This event also put his employment and thus his livelihood at risk. Mr. Williams could have been fired simply for missing a day of work. He also could have been fired just for being arrested, even though the arrest was unjust. Fortunately, his own boss was understanding, but the boss of a different person might not have been. And finally, this event nearly resulted in him having a permanent criminal record, even though his case was ultimately dismissed. Fortunately, after his case got widespread media attention, the prosecutor in the case offered to expunge Mr. Williams' record and fingerprints. However, had the New York Times not decided to so deeply investigate this event, Mr. Williams would still have a permanent record, even though his only crime was being a Black man. Unfortunately, Mr. Williams' accidental arrest is not an isolated incident. Since January, at least one other person that we know of has been mistakenly arrested and targeted because of a false match from a facial recognition system. The map on this slide shows cities and towns where we know that facial recognition systems are being used by local police, state police, and/or airports. And from this map, we can see that there are literally hundreds of groups around the United States, law enforcement groups, that are using facial recognition systems as we speak, almost always without their constituents' knowledge or consent. The implications of this map are terrifying. In 2018, computer science researchers Joy Buolamwini and Dr. Timnit Gebru showed that commercial facial recognition systems are significantly less accurate for people who have darker skin than for people who have lighter skin. Researchers have also shown that when used for surveillance, facial recognition systems identify the wrong person up to 98% of the time. When these systems are combined with historical context, specifically that Black people, especially Black men and Black masculine people, have been systematically over-policed, targeted, and murdered for the last 400 years by law enforcement, quite simply, the police cannot be trusted with facial recognition systems. People, especially Black people, are guaranteed to be harmed by facial recognition systems in the hands of law enforcement. Another example of a machine learning system that has caused harm is Facebook's ad delivery system. For context, their ad delivery system is the system that determines who sees each Facebook ad. The goal of this system is to show each ad to the people for which that ad is most relevant. And notably here, this is the system that is used after the advertiser decides who they want their audience to be. So this is Facebook deciding who the ultimate audience of the ad will be. So in 2019, Dr. Piotr Sapieczycki, a researcher at Northeastern University in Boston, and some of his collaborators conducted an experiment using Facebook's own marketing tools to discover how employment ads are distributed on Facebook. And what they discovered was very shocking. They discovered that Facebook's ad delivery system, despite neutral targeting preferences, shows significantly different job ads to each user depending on their gender and race. So in other words, even if an advertiser says that they want to show their ad to all genders and all races uniformly, the ad delivery system might decide based on the content of the ad to skew the audience of the ad towards certain genders or certain races. For example, through their study, these researchers discovered that women are more likely to receive ads for supermarket, janitor, and preschool jobs, whereas men are more likely to receive ads for taxi, artificial intelligence, and lumber jobs. And it's worth noting here that the researchers acknowledged that the binary gender nature of their study was due to restrictions in Facebook's tools. And they also discovered that Black people receive ads for taxi, janitor, and restaurant jobs at much higher rates than white people who themselves receive ads for secretary, artificial intelligence, and lumber jobs at much higher rates than Black people. Facebook's ad delivery system, the system we're talking about right here, causes two important types of harm. The first is that the system perpetuates and amplifies gender and race-based employment stereotypes. For example, cleaning and caregiving jobs are stereotypically held by women, which is exactly the demographic to which Facebook's ad system is presenting ads for caregiving and cleaning jobs. Similarly, service jobs are stereotypically held by Black people, also exactly the demographic to which Facebook's ad system is presenting ads for service jobs. Quite simply, if a Black woman or if any person only sees ads for janitor positions, this can reinforce a Black woman's internal belief that she is that she is only suited for these kinds of positions, which is 100% not true. And it's immoral that the system is reinforcing these stereotypes. The second, and I would argue greater harm, is that the system restricts Black people's and women's access to economic opportunity. For example, if a woman or a Black person is not shown an ad for a secretary job that pays $22 an hour, then this person there's no way that this person can apply for that job. At scale, by not showing ads for certain kinds of jobs, especially higher paying jobs, to Black people and women, Facebook is systematically excluding Black people and women from entire sections of the economy. To put the impact of Facebook's ad targeting system into context, consider these three graphs of wealth by race in the United States. In the leftmost graph, we see that white and Asian people have an adjusted median income that is approximately 1.6 times greater than that of Black and Hispanic people. And in the center graph, we see that white and Asian people are 50% likely to live in poverty than Black and Hispanic people. And finally, I think this is the most, if you take away one graph, I think you should take away the rightmost graph, which is that we see that the median net worth of a white family in the United States is 13 times greater than the median net worth of a Black family. By limiting especially Black people's access to economic opportunity, Facebook's ad delivery system is entrenching and widening the wealth gap between Black people and white people in the United States. Although these researchers, the Northeastern researchers study, focused only on Black and white Facebook users, it's pretty much guaranteed that the ad delivery system also entrenches and widens wealth gaps between other demographic groups in the US. So next, let's talk about two examples of processes for collecting machine learning labels that have caused harm. But first, I'd love to give y'all a brief overview of the importance of label data sets to machine learning models. I'm guessing that many folks here already know this, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, let's say that we wanted to train a classifier to predict whether or not a photo contained a cat. From a data set perspective, we'd need two things. The first is that we'd need a set of tens of thousands, or thousands or tens of thousands, or possibly hundreds of thousands of images that have been verified to contain cats. So here on the screen, we have 3 images that all have cats in them, and then someone has gone through each of them and confirmed that there's a cat in each of them. And we'd need, again, thousands or tens of thousands of images like this one, like these. And then we'd also need a set of thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of images that have been verified to not contain cats. So here on the screen, again, we have 3 images that don't contain cats, and someone has gone through and said that they are not cat for each of them. So as you may have surmised from the way that I've been describing these images, to assign a label of cat or not cat to each image, a human will literally have had to look at each image and assign a label to it. So every label is the result of a human looking at it and making a judgment about it. As a result, for every machine learning algorithm that is being used in an online platform, that company used thousands, if not tens of thousands, or again, hundreds of thousands of labeled examples as training data. For algorithms that make judgments about images, like the examples in this slide, or that make judgments about free-form text, like Facebook comments, every single one of these labels came from a human labeling agent. So every single label and every single model about image or text came from a human. And just to give you a bit of context about how companies actually create these data sets, companies typically turn to one of two approaches in order to create custom labeled data sets. So the first option is that they will hire a third-party company that manages its own labeling workforce. In this case, labeling agents are usually either full-time employees or contractors hired for a specific length of time for a specific project. Alternately, the company will use what's called a crowdsourcing platform, on which workers are classified as what are called independent contractors to label data. And it's worth noting here that this is the same, I guess, like worker category that Uber and Lyft's drivers are classified as. So independent contractor is the phrase here. And unfortunately, though, there is evidence of worker abuse from companies in both of these lists. In this next section of this talk, I'll talk about Cognizant on the left, which is a third-party vendor that was hired by Facebook to moderate Facebook content. And I'll also talk about Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is one of the most commonly used crowdsourcing platforms by companies. So first I'll talk about Cognizant. Specifically in February 2019, so at this point about a year, almost 2 years ago, The Verge, which is a news publication, specifically a reporter named Casey Newton, released a piece about the working conditions inside Cognizant, which, as I mentioned before, is a vendor that Facebook hires to label and moderate Facebook content. Casey's findings were shocking. Facebook was essentially running a digital sweatshop. So I'd like us to spend a few minutes watching this video in which Casey interviews a few people who actually worked for Cognizant. I would like to preface this video with the fact that it contains, as we start, it will contain a content warning that says that this video contains descriptions of violent acts against people, accounts of sexual harassment and post-traumatic stress disorder, and other potentially disturbing content. So I urge you to take care of yourself. If you feel that this will be upsetting for you, please feel free to mute the video for the next around 3.5 minutes. Cool.
In 2017, Facebook announced it would expand the number of people it had working on safety and security to 30,000, 15,000 of which would be content moderators. Content moderation is a really difficult job. You have to take Facebook's policies, which can change every day, and then apply them to decide what stays up on Facebook and Instagram and what comes down. A couple of months ago, I was contacted by some moderators who worked for Facebook in Tampa, Florida, through a company called Cognizant, and they told me that they wanted to go on the record. Now, this is a really big deal. Everyone who works for Cognizant signs a lengthy non-disclosure agreement in which they pledge not to talk about the work that they're doing. But the moderators who I met in Florida told me that they wanted to tell their story to the world so that we all could understand what it's like to do this job day to day and about the long-term mental health consequences of policing the biggest social network in the world.
Take the next left onto West Cross Avenue.
I was ecstatic. I thought I was going to climb the corporate ladder. I thought, this is Facebook. I'm going to be doing some really good stuff.
I thought I was going to be reading Facebook posts all day. So people going, everybody posts their business on Facebook. So I thought I was going to read everybody's stuff and then be able to, decide if it has to stay up or come down. So I thought it would be a fun job.
What did they tell you the job was going to be like?
Basically, they told me that I would be going on to higher profile social media accounts such as Disney World or Orlando, and I'd be doing kind of some data searching, seeing what types of posts most people react to and they comment to and like to. And
at what point did it become clear to you that you weren't going to be helping businesses on Facebook?
Probably the second or third day of training. And basically we had an outline of what we were doing And none of it was business. It was graphic violence, hate speech, sexual solicitation, sexual exploitation, that kind of stuff.
So they told you, we're going to put you in a queue of content that is dedicated to graphic violence and hate speech.
Yes, you would get the occasional random thing, but for the most part, it was always graphic violence and hate speech because that's all that was coming in for us.
Did anybody ask you about your mental health before they assigned you to that queue?
Nobody ever asked about my mental health there.
Yeah.
Nobody said anything about mental health.
What were like some of the kinds of things that you would see that would be really hard for you?
Oh, where do I start? Animals, mostly animals, abusive animals. I've seen them had a puppy with a rope hanging it, and I've seen a pit of pigs, and they threw fire, and you can hear the pigs screaming. I don't want to get emotional, talk about the animals.
There was one where there was a baby they were twin babies from like Saudi Arabia, and the mother was dropping the baby on the ground. This is one we saw over and over again, and then choke the baby, and you hear the baby gurgling and trying to breathe. And for days, it infected my mind. I had to know what happened to this baby because I'd seen it over and over and over again. And luckily, the baby was okay.
Cool. So that's all I'm going to show. The video is around 13 minutes long, and it's an amazing video. I would urge you to consider watching the full video after this talk. So through this video, as well as through a longer print piece that Casey Newton, the reporter, released, the world got a very close look at what being a Facebook content moderator is actually like, especially with respect to long-lasting mental health trauma. Some key points of his reporting were that employees are very underpaid. As we saw from one of the text overs in the video, a content moderator, including Sean, Michelle, and Melinda, the three people that Casey interviewed in the video, they each make less than $30,000 per year. And it's worth noting that this is especially low, considering that a full-time Facebook employee has a total compensation of around $240,000 per year. Casey's reporting also uncovered that working conditions at Cognizant are abysmal. Employees spend 6 full hours per day reviewing almost exclusively graphically violent or hateful content. Employees get 2 15-minute breaks and 1 30-minute lunch break per day. However, they spend much of their break times waiting in line for the bathroom, as often more than 500 people have to share 6 bathroom stalls. 2 of the Muslim employees that Casey spoke to even reported being ordered to stop praying during their 9 minutes per day of allotted wellness time. Additionally, Casey also uncovered that employees can be fired after making just a handful of errors per week. And those who remain live in fear of former colleagues returning to seek vengeance. One man that Casey spoke to spoke about starting to bring a gun to work to protect himself. And finally, we see that working at Cognizant caused lasting damage to many, if not all, of the people who worked there. And I think this is the most evident of the 3 things on the slide from the video we just saw. Sean, Michelle, and Melinda struggle to talk about how they still struggle with their mental health, even after leaving the company. The Verge reported that moderators cope with seeing traumatic images and videos by telling dark jokes about committing suicide, and then smoking weed during breaks to numb their emotions. Moderators are also routinely high at work. And perhaps worst of all, after they leave Cognizant, employees often develop PTSD-like symptoms, even though they are no longer eligible for mental health support from Facebook or Cognizant. To wrap up this section, let's talk briefly about Amazon Mechanical Turk. As I mentioned earlier, Amazon Mechanical Turk is one of the most commonly used crowdsourcing platforms by companies. And the way this model would differ from a model like Cognizant from a company's perspective is that you don't have to sign a contract that is long-term with the company. Instead, you simply log on to the Amazon Mechanical Turk platform. You upload the task that you'd like people to complete. For example, the cat image labeling task, maybe you upload 10,000 images and you'd like people to go through them and label them as cat or not cat. And the people who are completing the tasks are sort of abstracted away from the people uploading the tasks. From their perspective, from the uploader's perspective, you upload the tasks, you go away, you do more work, and then you come back a few days later and all your tasks have been completed. So from a company's perspective, it's very appealing because you don't have to think about workforce management, and actually collecting data sets is very inexpensive. But as I mentioned earlier, Mechanical Turk actually causes similar harms to Cognizant. Or rather, I mentioned that they both have harms, and it turns out that Mechanical Turk harms people in similar ways to Cognizant. So specifically, we know that like at Cognizant, Mechanical Turk workers are underpaid. In fact, even more so than Cognizant workers. The median wage for a Mechanical Turk worker is around $2 an hour. And it's estimated that only 4% of workers earn more than the US federal minimum wage of $7.25. Even though researchers estimate that around 75% of Mechanical Turk workers live in the United States. There are also wage gaps on Mechanical Turk. Workers who do not live in the United States, are women, and/or are disabled likely earn much less than $2 per hour. Additionally, the working conditions experienced by Mechanical Turk workers are abysmal. As I mentioned earlier, workers are legally classified as independent contractors, and the implications of this are that they don't get paid overtime, they don't get healthcare or other benefits, they can't unionize, they have no legal protections from wage theft, they have no guarantee of consistent income over time, and they have no educational or career advancement opportunities. And finally, similar to Cognizant, people who work on Mechanical Turk often experience mental health damage as a result of their work there. Finding well-paying tasks as a worker on Mechanical Turk is very stressful, and workers report waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. In order to get tasks that pay better. And this is because most tasks aren't priced well. So in order to get the tasks that are priced high enough so that you can actually afford to pay your utility bill or your heating bill, you have to wake up early and kind of sit and wait to pounce on the tasks that are well-paying. And we know from psychology research that consistently being stressed about whether you will earn enough money to pay your bills or support your family has long-term physical and mental health consequences. And I think finally, as we wrap up this section, it's worth noting that contrary to popular belief, many people who complete tasks on crowdsourcing platforms do so in order to earn the bulk of their income. So Amazon would have us believe that the people who are on Mechanical Turk are on Mechanical Turk in order to supplement another source of income, and they're using their earnings from Mechanical Turk in order to support a hobby or some other arguably non-essential aspect of their life. In reality, though, most people on Mechanical Turk this is their primary source of income. And they often will turn to Mechanical Turk because they live in the part of the US or part of the world where full-time employment is not available. Think parts of the United States that are economically depressed and where a lot of the full-time jobs have been moved to other parts of the world. So as a result, I think it's worth noticing that people who work for private labeling companies like Cognizant and people who work for crowdsourcing platforms like Mechanical Turk are actually not that different. Like, they have very similar goals. And their goal here is to complete labeling tasks in a safe and healthy work environment in exchange for fair wages. So very simple goal, work in exchange for fair pay. So at this point, we've looked at several examples of what harm is occurring as a result of machine learning systems. So let's spend a few minutes investigating why this harm is occurring. So as you might imagine, the answer to this question is complex, as there are many reasons why machine learning systems are causing harm. One big reason is that machine learning systems are often used in high-stakes decision processes. like in the first example, when a facial recognition system was used to identify someone who supposedly committed a crime. If making the wrong decision in a context has huge implications for someone's life, like arresting someone, then adding a machine learning model into the context inherently means that there's a high risk of causing harm. Another big reason that machine learning systems are often designed without mechanisms to dispute system decisions. For example, Facebook's ad delivery system does not allow users to contest the system's decisions about which types of jobs are and aren't relevant to them. Instead, the system makes the final decision about which ads are shown to each person. By contrast, a better designed ad delivery system might actually ask each user what kinds of jobs they'd like to see, thus allowing them to override decisions about ad relevance made by the ad delivery algorithm. And machine learning systems are often designed without such a mechanism for dispute because machine learning systems are considered by many as neutral and objective. In reality, though, machine learning systems are just as, if not more likely to be biased than human arbiters. A third huge reason why machine learning systems cause harm is whose perspectives are and aren't being centered during the design process. So people who are harmed by machine learning systems tend to be disproportionately from marginalized groups, especially Black and Indigenous people and poor people. Perspectives from such groups are rarely intentionally sought and centered when a machine learning system is being designed. Additionally, most machine learning engineers and data scientists, as well as most others involved in the machine learning design process, like product managers, engineering managers, designers, user experience researchers, and writers and executive, like so many people who are involved in the product design process. These people tend to be overwhelmingly white or Asian and relatively wealthy. And unless they do otherwise, people tend to design with themselves and their own experiences in mind. So machine learning systems in production are overwhelmingly designed with the perspectives of very privileged people in mind. Another reason that harm occurs is that companies and governments aren't usually required to disclose when a machine learning system is making a decision. And there are also very few laws governing when a machine learning system can and can't be used. In combinations, companies and governments have no accountability for the machine learning systems. And the last 6 months have shown us that governments like the United States Senate and companies like Amazon prioritize the comfort of wealthy people over the health and safety of poor and working class people. When machine learning systems are added to the mix, poor and working class people invariably get hurt. As a result of these conditions, machine learning system developers have massively more power than machine learning system participants. So here I define a machine learning system developer, it's the tiny font at the bottom of the screen, as anyone who is involved in the design, development, and deployment of machine learning systems. So this includes natural candidates like machine learning engineers and data scientists, but also software engineers of other disciplines who are involved in the process, and product managers, engineering managers, user experience researchers, policy writers, UX writers, lawyers, level managers, all the way up to C-suite executives. And so from this, my point here is that in essence, if you help develop products at a company or in an organization that uses machine learning, you have more power to affect change than any one participant in the machine learning system. And quite simply, we are responsible for the harm caused by systems that we contribute to. So if and when you are part of a team that is deploying a new machine learning system, encourage your team to explicitly consider who will be harmed by it and then work to mitigate those harms. And if those harms cannot be mitigated, do not deploy the system. It's that simple. And to kind of draw in the second part of the presentation about labeling agents, there's worth noting that there's a similar power imbalance between people who create labeling tasks and people who complete labeling tasks. And as with systems, we are responsible for the harm that labeling agents experience if we are the people who have hired those agents to complete the work. So similarly, if and when you are part of a team that is hiring agents to label data for you, partner with a vendor that is transparent about how they treat their workers. When you're interviewing prospective vendors, ask them questions like, are your workers full-time employees? Are they paid at least a living wage in their country, in the city and country in which they live? Do they get health care? Are they required to moderate graphically violent or hateful content? Do they receive mental health support while they are employed and also after they leave employment? And just to provide my own perspective here, I've talked with many labeling companies at this point, and there are fortunately companies that do treat their workers ethically. So it's up to us to seek them out and to vote with our feet, so to speak, and choose one of these companies. And my final piece of advice is that I would really urge you not to use Mechanical Turk or other crowdsourcing platforms. People can simply not survive on the wages that they earn on those platforms. And it is until those platforms fix their model so that the people who, upon whom that platform's success is kind of built, and until the platform guarantees that those people earn a living wage in their city and country of residence, then it is immoral for those platforms to exist, and it is immoral for wealthy tech companies to support them. Cool. So this is my second to last, or I guess my last main section. I'd love to talk with y'all about some concrete things that you can do going forward. So here are some ways that you can help prevent harm caused by machine learning systems. So at the top of the slide, you'll see 4 machine learning developers. And here, again, I mean anyone involved in the machine learning development process. Basically, if you're helping to develop a product at a company or in another organization, then you are, for the purposes of this presentation, a machine learning developer. So the first thing that I'd recommend that you do is that when you design a new machine learning system or you're evaluating an existing machine learning system, ask yourself and your team the following questions. What can go wrong when this machine learning system is deployed? When something does go wrong, who is harmed? How likely is it that something will go wrong? And does the harm disproportionately fall on marginalized groups? And then use your answers to these questions to list possible harms and then work to mitigate each one. I would also recommend that you conduct an audit of machine learning systems that you have or are considering producing for disparate impact. So by this, I mean, typically you'd evaluate a model's accuracy and precision and recall. I'd suggest that you calculate the accuracy by race and accuracy by gender, precision by race, precision by gender, so that you can see if the model is consistently less accurate or has a consistently higher false positive rate for certain genders or certain races. And I ran out of time in this presentation to go through more concrete suggestions, but I have this link here, and the link at the end of the deck is the same link as this one. And in this other link, I have more suggestions that I would encourage you to read, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about any of them. And almost done. Unfortunately, in this kind of work, good intentions alone are not enough. We, as practitioners in some capacity, we need to educate ourselves about how harms tend to occur and then apply this knowledge to new situations. Fortunately for us, there are at this point, many great resources available, and most of these have been written by women, especially Black women. On the slide, there are the 6 books on the left. These are 6 mainstream books about the oppression that machine learning systems cause and or exacerbate. And on the right, there's one film called Coded Bias, which I've actually watched twice now and is really good. It has some incredible narratives about the producers of the film interview several of the authors of these books, as well as actually several people who have been harmed by a system. So it's a very powerful film. And the film actually came out at Sundance this year, which is awesome. So if you're interested in this kind of work, I would really encourage you to commit to reading one of these books or watching this film over the next month or so, just to sort of build your intuition about how these problems are actually occurring. And that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this talk. Thank you for being interested in this topic. We really need people like you in our tech companies and in our governments. And I'm always happy to chat. I'm on Twitter. Come say hi. This is my email. And I also wrote a blog version of this talk a few months ago, and this is the short link for it. So check it out. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Skyler. I really enjoyed learning more, and I read the blog version also, and it's very good. So I would encourage all of you listening to check that out as well. And I'm really glad you gave us resources at the end. I've actually read that book, or one of them, Automating Inequality. It's great. I would highly recommend it to anybody else interested in learning more about this as well. So I think we have some time for some questions if we've gotten some questions from the audience, but I wanted to just start first because you and I have talked a little bit already about this presentation, but I remember that you mentioned that you've given this presentation to other people as well, or at least a version of it. Could you just tell us a little bit about what inspired you to create this talk? Why do you want to do this, and how did this come about?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I started getting interested in the topic of fairness and machine learning around 2 years ago, I think. And I saw it as the intersection of my values and the skills that I have. And I think I made a super early version of this presentation at the time, and I grounded it in, I think, more sort of theoretical fairness things. There's a lot of work in this field that is very theoretical and not grounded in real people and real impact that this work has had. And so I was inspired to create this presentation for myself and also for others, ground this work in stories and to ground this work in actual impact that these systems have. Yeah, and I think I've also used it to just try to tell this kind of story in as many different ways as possible to people in my company and also in general. It's really important to me to try to be an ally in the space, and this was my way to do it.
Yeah, no, I really like that, and I think it's nice to hear individual stories. I think those are always very impactful when you're hearing about problems that are so large. It's nice to hear individual stories as well. And then one more before we get to the questions from people listening. So we know that you are a machine learning engineer and backend software engineer, but what exactly are you doing on the anti-discrimination team at Airbnb? Because I know a lot of people are interested in going into a career in that area, but may not know exactly what that looks like in terms of the work that you would be doing on an anti-discrimination team. So if you could talk, I know that's probably a loaded question, but if you could talk briefly just about what you're creating.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Airbnb anti-discrimination team was founded in around 2016 in response to the Airbnb while black hashtag that was trending on Twitter at the time, which was basically a lot of Black guests talking about how they had been systematically rejected from Airbnb listings because of their race, and which the founders of Airbnb were horrified by, and out of that sort of collective conversation came the formation of this team. So this team is it's a cross-functional team. There are several engineers, an engineering manager, a product manager, a user researcher, a writer, a designer, data scientist, and I think that's it. And so together we work on both proactive and reactive ways to prevent discrimination on Airbnb's platform. And the biggest thing that we worked on recently is an initiative called Project Lighthouse, which basically is a methodology via which we can measure experience gaps due to perceived race on our platform. So more concretely, we've known for several years now that, for example, guests that are perceived to be white are more likely to be accepted than guests who are perceived to be Black. But we've never had a mechanism to actually determine that exact percentage in a way that also respects people's privacy. We never want to have, or we don't want to have a database of or we have someone's name and someone's perceived race, because that could cause a lot of harm to them, and we would not want that. So this Project Lighthouse allows us to measure, for example, the acceptance rate gap without having identifiable data, which is huge. So we released that. We started that work in June, or I guess announced it in June, and then we'll be sharing our results from that once we have them.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing we've been working on, and then I guess other things we've done. We've also done a lot of work around hiding people's profile photos during the booking process. A lot of that implicit bias comes in as a host is considering whether or not to accept a guest. So a big thing that we added on Airbnb a couple of years ago is that a host cannot see a guest profile photo until they've been accepted. And then I'm doing some work right now around discriminatory language and preventing that on the platform.
That's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And again, I think it's really nice to hear more concrete examples of what you could be doing at some of these, especially like the larger companies and on these specific teams. So thank you. I think we are going to start with some questions from listeners. So let's start with this first one. Where does the bias within ML come from? Does it come from the data set provided, or does it naturally come up through the use of these algorithms?
That's a good question. So the algorithm itself is not racist or sexist, but I would also not say that it's just the data set, because I think that bias creeps in at many portions during the machine learning development lifecycle. So certainly there is bias in data sets, but I think there are bias in other parts of the development process. For example, is the task itself a fair task? Like, does the task consider all people who will be affected by the system? Is there a way for people to dispute system decisions? Is there, like, what sorts of user research was involved in the design of the task and in the design of the system? So I think data sets are one of many areas in which bias creeps in. Great question.
Perfect. I think moving on, we have one from Tiffany. So how can an individual at a company voice concerns about the use or creation of their machine learning systems, especially if they are not a machine learning engineer or they don't work specifically on that product?
That's a great question. So I think tech workers at especially, or I guess in particular, large companies have been in the news a lot in the last few years for organizing internally to protest their company's involvement in certain projects. So workers at Amazon have been involved with this, workers at Google have been involved with this, and they've actually been fairly successful at working with their companies to boycott, essentially, unethical uses of machine learning. So if you work at a company that has an active group of workers sort of looking out for how their company is using machine learning, I would encourage you to get involved with a group like that. If the company is a lot smaller, or you have the opportunity to be more closely involved, I would just start having conversations with people at the company, kind of see who's interested in this. One of my teammates at Airbnb hosted a viewing of Coded Bias, which is the film I mentioned earlier, internally, and about 15 people came, and it was a really great way to just like build community and around this topic, and build allies internally. So like as projects come up maybe later, like we can sort of talk together and approach the team that we are concerned about. So I think there are lots of ways to get involved if this is something you're passionate about and you work at a company or organization that uses machine learning or is even considering using machine learning.
Yeah, I've definitely heard about some of those other groups, especially at the large companies. I think those tend to get more media attention, maybe, but that's really great advice. And lastly, just for our last question to wrap up, A lot of people here are students. Most people in Hack4Impact are students. We may have some people who are not in Hack4Impact that are also listening. But you were able to get a career that is focused on tech and social good, which for many of us is the ultimate goal, the ultimate dream of combining those two interests. Do you have any advice for current students who are interested in exploring those careers, and what helped you get to the position that you are in today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with respect to my current role, I got really lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I joined Airbnb, and I joined a more specific, like a more, I guess, like a different team first. And then I switched to the anti-discrimination team around a year and a half ago because my interests were in that space and they happened to have headcount. So I think luck and like persistence were important there, mostly luck. But with respect to finding positions, I think there are a growing number of positions in this space. And I think there are also a growing number of like aggregators out there that are creating like job boards of these positions. Like I know Code for America has a job board. I recently found a newsletter called Impactful that I believe has a job board. And there are a few others. So they exist. I think I think they're not going to be at big companies necessarily. I think Airbnb is unique in that our leadership is very receptive to this kind of work. I don't think that's the case at most other big tech companies. So I think if you really want to be at a place that walks the walk, you might need to look elsewhere. But I think there are just a growing number of government opportunities and nonprofits and smaller companies that are just doing really cool work.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thank you again so much for coming to talk with us today. I think we are pretty much out of time, but thank you for speaking with us, and thank you to everyone who is watching right now. As I mentioned previously, we'll be hosting speakers monthly, but if you simply can't wait until then, we also have a podcast, and you can learn more about that if you're interested at bytesofgood.org. So thank you again to all of you who came, and I can't wait to have you again next month.
Thank you.